The Beatles. The Beatles are known to be one of the most successful British boy bands ever known. Their style and inspiring career took them to the top, and they practically paved the way for other boy bands across the world. This group of highly successful artists did not gain popularity just by recording and putting out one song. In all honesty, they have come a long way to becoming who we speak so highly of now. In today's video, we take a look at the journey and life of the Beatles. Let's get right into it, and remember to subscribe to our channel to see more amazing videos just like this one. The birth of the Beatles band began in November 1956, when 16-year-old John Lennon created a skiffle group with various people he knew back in Quarry Bank High School, Liverpool. Initially, there was the question of what to name their group, but they ended up choosing the name Blackjack. This name did not stick for long because upon realizing that a local group was already using the name, they decided to change their band name to the Quarrymen. Lennon and Paul McCartney met in 1957, and Paul joined the group as rhythm guitarist. A year later, during one of the band's performances, Paul invited his friend George Harrison, who auditioned to join the group. Lennon, who was impressed, rejected George, saying he was 15 years old and considered too young. But George didn't relent and was persistent until after a month. Lennon accepted him into the group, and he joined as the band's second rhythm guitarist. In 1959, the group of men from the Quarry Bank left the Quarrymen group. What was left was only Lennon, Paul, and Harrison, who branded themselves as Johnny and the Moondogs and played rock and roll whenever they found a drummer to make the perfect music. This was until they found Ringo Starr later in 1962, who became the drummer in the band. But before then, Lennon's friend Stuart Sutcliffe was invited to join the band as a bass singer in 1960. He was the one who suggested that they change the band's name to Beatles, which stuck until May of the same year, when their name was changed to Silver Beatles. Still bearing the name Silver Beatles, the band of talented men grew and even went on tour in Scotland as a backup group for pop singer Johnny Gentle, who also hailed from Liverpool. The group switched to Silver Beatles by July 1960, and in August, they became the Beatles, and this name stuck forever. They did go through a long list of name changes, but we think as you evolve, you definitely would need a touch-up here and there. Don't you think so? In 1960, the Beatles had a manager, Alan Williams, who, though not officially signed with the group, got them a residency in Hamburg, Germany. But the band was still in need of a drummer. Hence, they hired Pete Best at the time. This group of 5 artists, consisting of Lennon, Paul, George, Stuart, and now Pete, journeyed to Hamburg 4 days after bringing in Pete. The band was contracted to Bruno Koschmider, a club owner with whom they signed a 3.5-month residency. For the next 2 years, the Beatles were engaged in overnight performances all through their residency in Hamburg. The bass singer, Stuart Sutcliffe, had to leave the group, and Paul McCartney became the bass singer for the band. Now, as a 4-man band, they were signed to Bert Kaempfert, who was a producer, and he introduced the Beatles to Polydor Records, a record label where they began recording several songs. Under this label, the Beatles recorded hit songs like My Bonnie in June 1961, which after its release 4 months later, climbed to number 32 on the Music Market chart. The Beatles finished their second Hamburg residency, and they became quite popular in Liverpool. Just when they began getting recognition, their constant club performances became boring to them, since that was the only thing they were doing over and over again, and even at the same clubs. The Beatles met Brian Epstein during one of their usual performances at the Cavern Club in 1961. Brian was a local record store owner and also a music columnist. He proposed his intentions to become a manager for the Beatles, and this went on for a couple of months until they agreed to his offer. At the beginning of the new year, in January 1962, Brian Epstein became the Beatles' new manager. His first task was to release the Beatles from the clutches of Bert Kaempfert's production agency. Eventually, he reached an agreement with the agency for a 1-month early release in exchange for a final recording session in Hamburg. Brian continued to search for record labels for the boys to sign recording deals and make more songs. In an event where Brian was to secure a UK record deal for the Beatles, he had to negotiate an early dissolution of the band's previous contract with Polydor. The condition was that they would record a few more Tony Sheridan songs for Polydor. But all wasn't so rosy for the Beatles, as they were initially rejected by Decca Records. However, they were signed by George Martin, who was a producer, to EMI's Parlophone label. The Beatles' first recording session with Martin was on the 6th of June in London at EMI Recording Studios, now known as Abbey Road Studios. Pete, the band's drummer, wasn't playing to Martin's content, plus the band was contemplating his removal. This led him to being dropped and replaced with Ringo Starr. During their contract with EMI, the Beatles recorded songs like Love Me Do, Please Please Me, and P.S. I Love You. Although a different drummer was used in Ringo's place for the recording of these songs, he still featured as a tambourine player in Love Me Do. Upon its release earlier in October, Love Me Do hit number 17 on the record retailer chart that year. The Beatles rounded up their fifth and final Hamburg residency in December 1962. By February 1963, the Beatles had recorded a total of 10 songs under Martin's production. This was for their debut LP, Please Please Me. The single, Please Please Me, was released in January, 2 months before the album release, and it peaked at number 1 on every UK chart except Record Retailer, where it was number 2 on the chart. The journey of the boy band gets more interesting. But first, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so you can find out more about some of the best boy bands ever. From then onwards, the Beatles were reaching the greatest heights of their music career. The release of Please Please Me in March 1963 was the first out of all 11 Beatles albums released in the UK to take the top spot on the chart. In August, their fourth single, She Loves You, was sold faster than any other record in the United Kingdom at the time, selling a total of 750,000 copies in barely 4 weeks of its release. It later became the band's first single to sell 1 million copies and was the largest selling record in the United Kingdom until 1978. The Beatles quickly gained media exposure, and their comical response to it drew people's interest more. The Beatles began touring the United Kingdom, and with more popularity, performed at UK's top variety show, the London Palladium, bagging about 15 million viewers. The band had so many fans who were at some point tagged Beatlemania due to their enthusiastic approach towards anything related to the Beatles. With this, the Beatles even surpassed American music artists like Chris Montez and Tommy Roe, as they reached top billing by audience demand. This feat has never been accomplished by any British artist during their tours. Between June and July, the Beatles toured across different countries and performed 37 shows in Hong Kong, Denmark, New Zealand, the Netherlands, and Australia. They later returned to the U.S. in 1964, but not without a spectacular win. By then, they had toured 23 cities and performed a total of 30 concerts during the tours. While in the U.S., the Beatles appeared on their first live show, The Ed Sullivan Show. To show how much the public loved this band, a total of 73 million people watched the live show. Their popularity did not sit right with American critics, seeing as they were a group of Liverpool boys who came out of nowhere to dominate the airwaves in America. But the Beatles had way too many fans, and more people turned up for their performances, each one of them wanting to get a glimpse of the world-known Beatles. As their fame increased, so did their music. In 1965, the Beatles released Rubber Soul, an album that reached every nook and cranny of the world as the band displayed a different but quite interesting sound. Songs like Drive My Car and Norwegian Wood were among these new musical sounds created by the Beatles. The band did have their downtimes in 1966, when their songs were banned in several countries due to a rude statement made by Lennon during an interview. But in true Beatles style, they came back with a force in 1967 upon the release of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. This album release would later top the UK charts and would remain in that position for over 6 months. It also topped the charts in the United States for over 3 months. The same album won 4 Grammys alongside Album of the Year and Best Contemporary Album. These wins were like a statement being made to their fans that they were back in full beast mode. Later that same year, their manager Brian Epstein passed away, and the band struggled to carry on without Brian. They released Let It Be, and from then on, tensions began to grow among the band. In 1970, Paul McCartney filed a suit for dissolution of the contractual partnership between the members of the Beatles band. They announced their split up in 1971, but not until 1974 was the dissolution final, which brought an end to the Beatles band after 11 years of being together. The Beatles were the band that brought an entire revolution to pop music, thereby earning a strong fan base with their style and added humor. They became the best-selling artists ever known in history, with a total of 600 million sales across the world. This proves the impact that the band left in the music industry and hence are branded as leaders of socioculture and youth movements back then. Thanks for watching today's video. Let us know in the comments section which songs from this band you like the most, and if you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.